This is Mike Klein from Virtual Appliance, and I'm here to introduce the MASH platform for asset management. An acronym standing for Mobile, Automation, Security, Health. With MASH, you can design and deploy dashboards to your mobile device, letting you manage your assets wherever they exist on the globe in real time. This is a fairly lengthy training video for the MASH IDE, or Application Builder. It's going to run anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes plus. We're going to be going through every feature of the IDE, and that's the reason why. If you are only interested in the executive summary or you have ADD, etc., you probably aren't going to want to watch this. So we're going to go through the entire build sequence to give you a warm fuzzy feeling, and we're going to describe every inch top to bottom of the IDE. So I guess starting off from the very top, we have a full complement of menu items, all of the usual suspects. We have an undo, redo stack, full cut, copy, paste, delete, inspection and customization of the components, customizers. We have the full build sequence. We have a nice search ability. Of course, the most basic. I finally felt comfortable enabling the About menu. And then we have a toolbar that replicates just about all of these menu items except for a few that you obviously wouldn't want. We have the search ability here. So notice I've got a component here named M. Klein. I can search for any component that has the text M. Klein in it, and we can see all of these references. I guess this is a good point to mention this lower pane here. This is your logs window. It allows you to select between two kinds of logs. The first is your application log, and this covers everything from import through creation, through configuration and customization, and validation. And all of your compile and deployment errors are brought to this deployment logs, which has a much simpler, less structured format. And the reason that this is so structured is because we have a modeling tool. This is a fairly high-level development environment. So that's the number of views so far. These, what we have on the left and the right, are palettes. This palette on the left is a creation palette. So we can either drag and drop if we want items into the palette. Let me undo that change. Or we can merely click on the item, and we can even hold down a numeric key, like I'll hold down the number 5. That is a bug. Let me do that again. There we go. We get 5 cameras. So that's a very nice, convenient way to do a big bulk creation of components, which is quite often needed. So that's the creation palette. And let's talk about the palette on the right. This allows you to link components together. So as an example, I have, for my Clear Lake site, I have a remote server that is in my network, and I only want certain people to be able to access this remote server. Because my wife and I are the owners, we're the only ones listed here. So we are explicitly listed as the only ones that have access. This is a white list of authorized users, and that's why you don't see us over here on this side. And you can see that the drag and drop is pretty tight, because if I try to drag where I already have an entry, it's not an option. So that's how the references palette works. And another example of setting up a reference is in the case of wiring the security panel to my server's serial port. And we can see that by going to the property where we're allowed to specify that. So this shows that my security panel, named NX8E, is wired to my Clear Lake server's serial port. So that's the references palette, and you can also do multi-select from the references palette. So the last view, I guess, that's of importance here is probably the primary view in the IDE, and that's of your application itself. This is a simple, structured, hierarchical tree. We have an app, that's a bug, it shouldn't show this component here. We have a top-level root application component, and descending from that, we have a number of categories. Every bundle of components you import, those components have categories associated with them. So you'll be able to create top-level components like these here inside of a category. So And you can also, any operation that you can do on a component, cut, copy, paste, delete, inspect, you can do on a parent folder, and it applies to all of the child nodes underneath. So the user interface does not get in the way whatsoever. Every possible UI construct and convention that I'm pretty much aware of has been enabled in this development environment, other than the fact that my manual event handling editor kind of sucks. Everything else is absolutely first class. The editor is the only hole in the IDE, but it turns out it doesn't matter so much. So let's, and once you drill down from a top level component, let's finish the hierarchy here before I talk about the components themselves briefly. We have a number of, again, we've discussed in other slides the fact that a component has features. Those are properties, actions, and events. Well, these are the properties of the building level component. We have users that are authorized to access this home. We have devices that are associated with this level of perimeter. This is a bug. Users should be shown under occupants. And the reason these property nodes have an arrow through them, this probably isn't the right glyph for the icon, but these components shown in these kinds of folders are actually references to another component that you created elsewhere. And it's kind of an important distinction to understand. And of course, in this case, these components, because you can tell from the folder type, these are actually created off of the building itself, either by drag and drop or again through the new menu. And of course, once you drill down to a reference node, you're not allowed to drill down again, because then we get into a graph recursion that would really make no sense. And if you'd like to go to that actual component, you can always do that by hitting this menu item. Another interesting menu item, we do direct manipulation everywhere, whether it's at design time in the IDE or at runtime with the mobile devices. Everything is point and click. So what we can do on a component menu, actions currently isn't enabled. When the OSGI version of the IDE is produced, where you're working live, you will be able to essentially use the IDE as another runtime client, and these actions will be enabled. But for now, they don't make sense for the most part in most cases. I'll show an example later of where they do matter at design time. We have the cut, copy, paste, delete, remove, rename. You can, of course, also rename in place the node. And we can handle events on that component node. And the way this works is we just basically select the event we want to handle. And I'm doing this a very low-level manual way. Extremely powerful, but it may not be something that you require. I haven't required manual event handlers in the 2 years that I've been running my different sites. So let's say we want to manually handle the needs help event from the HFLEC user. All users can issue their own critical events like panic events, police, medical, or fire perhaps, just general requests for help. So when I click on that, boom, here we go. And we can see here it created it down at off the declaration component, not off the reference to that where we actually hit this menu item. So here's where I'd put in Java code. And this is very low level. It should be a much higher level editor. That will get fixed, giving you pop-up and drop in and fill in kind of context sensitive code completion, as well as built-in help. There are generated HTML help pages for all of the bundles of components, so that could be brought up here. Future plan is to introduce a domain-specific language. Kind of think of it as a very high-level version of Java, similar to a scripting language, that will give you all of these features and be extremely, extremely powerful. And you'll be able to use that language in a number of different places. So this is a low-level way of handling an event. There's also a high-level means of doing event handling, and that's off one of the settings components. Settings are a singleton component, either associated with the core bundle. There's a couple of those for the logging service, and that's related to event handling. We'll get into that in just a second. The system logger, all events go to the system logger by default. This is currently in memory. It needs to be hooked up to a JDBC source, and this is one of the features that I want to enable before release. And then there's a UP&P gateway component. So there's also settings components for the different bundles that have been imported. And the whole point of a settings component is to apply some sort of configuration that will then be applied possibly by default to all of the other components. In the case of the Android service, that includes things such as device policy that can be pushed to the device. So you can specify that device policy here globally for any mobile devices that are connecting in an ad hoc fashion to your MASH server. Or you can actually decide to explicitly provision an Android device and then go ahead and apply policy directly to that device itself. And you can easily enable or disable whether mobile devices can do ad hoc connections without being explicitly provisioned by merely toggling a true-false setting in the Android service component. So the logging service is very important. Event logging is the key monitoring feature here. When an event occurs on a component, I didn't want to do an inspect on that. That's a bug. I wanted to do a customize. When an event occurs on a component, we want something done in response. So we can see that this should be in a tree view form, as well as the palettes being in a tree view form for when you just have too much data. This is probably a few days of work per view, and it's required not really at the moment, but for a very large applications, this kind of visual scaling is going to be required. So let's go ahead and pick a particular event that I know happens to be already handled. In this case, it's the building alarming event. So we can see here that there are already two event handlers. An event handler is a component that can basically respond to an event. In the case of email, it will send that event to email. In the case of the text-to-speech component, it will announce that voice off the audio port on your server. Great for sites with a whole house audio system, paging intercom-style speakers. Event loggers are also available for files, for database, eventually, persistent event loggers. Number of other event loggers are available. SMS, the mobile device itself can have events logged explicitly to it. Another feature specific to mobile devices and event handling is you can decide to forward all events to the mobile device because you don't want to manually handle them here onesie-twosie fashion. And that again is something that won't scale in extremely large installations. And another nice feature is we can use the references palette and do a multi-select if we want to go ahead and add event loggers to handle this event. I didn't do that drop because I don't want to undo it since I'm doing a deploy, because there's currently a bug and undo redo on this particular data type that we're looking at. So this is the current way I am doing sort of an assisted event handling for the user. But what I plan on migrating to is you're actually going to be creating a number of handled events is just children of your logging service. And this is a little more in line with the development environment itself. We aren't bringing up additional views. And this is fairly straightforward and extremely graphical too, because we can just do a simple thing such as, okay, Android phone got our location updated. We do a drop. It says right here we're going to, this event logger is about the Android phone location updated event. I can then do, hey, let's select everything here, all those event loggers. We all want them to register the location updated event. And now we can see under the loggers references property, those three event loggers. Let me go ahead and undo that series of changes. So that's how we graphically handle in a high-level fashion the event handling. So those are the settings components. I should probably do another video describing the component families themselves more in depth. I'm sure a lot of you probably get the basic idea, but that'll be done in a different video going through all of these domains. So I've gone through all of the views, all of the menus and actions, whether they're in the toolbar or menu or in the pop-up menus that are provided. And we've gone through, I believe, and shown that this we can validate there are no errors. Let's go ahead and actually create a validation error. We'll add a new component. We can see that message came up here in the logs. That's a bug that this isn't blue here. So let's go ahead and just leave this component as is because it has no password. We say we want to do a validate. Validation is slowed down immensely by the QuickTime screen recording feature. And it tells us there's a number of problems with this new component. And it explicitly tells us what's wrong. The password property has no value. Please provide one. So we'll go ahead and put in some dummy value. I also know that it's going to squawk about the fact that we don't have a full name for this user. So let's go ahead and put in a full name, Joe Blow. Let's go ahead and revalidate. There we go. Application has no errors. So now let me go ahead and undo that series of changes that I just made. I'm undoing all the way back to the beginning of the application. Okay, now we're just about wrapping up here, folks. So we actually are ready to go through. We can just hit deploy because deploy will do the validate compile package sequence if you require it. Our application actually validated, which is why we hopped over to the deployment view. We're compiling the application. Validation, compilation, packaging, and deployment, again, are significantly slowed down by QuickTime's recording feature. So we have a problem here that it's mentioning. My undo feature doesn't work with event handlers, so I'm going to need to manually delete that event handler. So that's why the compilation file failed. So let's go ahead and redo that deployment. Actually, it looks here like it may have failed for another reason. I recently made a minor change to the model for the concept of a user, and that's why it was squawking. We should be good now. If we aren't, I'll be very upset. Okay, we're good. So we've validated, we've done the required code generation, we've compiled all that code. We're packaging the code up into a web application archive. And after that, we'll be doing a deployment. We're doing a deployment to our J2EE server identified here. This is an internal IP address, so I'm not giving away anything confidential here. Yada dee, yada da. Okay, we'll be done in just a few seconds here. This is a local server on my LAN that I'm deploying to. So depending on the number of components and really the number of libraries, other libraries that those bundles are bringing in that are required, that's a factor, whether it's a local or remote server and the size of your application, of how long it'll take to deploy. Without the QuickTime recording feature, I believe it's about 20-25 seconds to deploy locally. And in the case of my remote server, good Lord, I think it's maybe a minute or so. So I think within about 5 seconds we'll be done with the deployment. This is a bit embarrassing, but I blame my Mac laptop and Apple. Okay, we're good to go. Our application has been deployed, it's fully in traffic, and at this point mobile devices could connect to that server, and basically users can access their dashboards and do asset management worldwide in real time. So we've gone through all the features of the IDE, and I believe this has provided a fairly comprehensive tutorial for folks, short of the domain knowledge for all of the components.